podcast is brought to you by the Association for Coaching, one of the world's leading international professional bodies which is advancing coaching in business and society worldwide. I'm Helen O'Grady, a master executive coach and coach supervisor, and your host for this in-depth series on coaching supervision. Each episode delves into a distinctive aspect of supervision with leading practitioners and thought leaders in the field, uncovering the nuanced ways supervision enhances coaching practice, supports well-being and drives professional growth. Whether you're a seasoned supervisor, a coach curious about supervision, or simply interested in the dynamics of reflective practice, this series offers illuminating conversations that will transform how you think about coaching excellence. So I'm thrilled to welcome Clare Norman to the Coaching Supervision podcast. Clare's a master certified coach, a supervisor, a mentor coach, but is dedicated to enabling people to feel truly seen for who they are with over 20 years coaching experience. She empowers individuals to find their authentic voice and express their needs, creating a more caring world. And in her work with leaders, Clare challenges the status quo, encouraging a shift towards prioritising people alongside profits. She believes that by developing individuals, we create ripple effects that transform organisations and communities. At the same time, Clare is passionate about elevating the coaching profession. She advocates for higher standards in coaching and deeper awareness of coachability, ensuring that both coaches and clients are primed for transformative experiences. Through her coaching, writing and thought leadership, Clare is making a lasting impact on individuals, organisations and the coaching industry at large. So welcome, Clare.
Thank you, Helen. It's so nice to be with you in this format compared to all of our formats.
Exactly, because Clare, I've been lucky enough to have supervision with Clare and mentor coaching. So I very much know your style and support it and have learnt so much. So looking forward to sharing your wisdom with our audience.
Yeah.
So you talked about there in the introduction around coachability, and obviously your newest book is called Cultivating Coachability, but it's probably not a term necessarily that everybody will understand. So what's your definition of it, Clare?
I remember coachability being a term that people used when I first trained as a coach 20 plus years ago. And when you look at some of the literature, the articles about this thing called coachability, it tends to talk about how willing are people to take feedback, for example. Well, that's not really what we do.
No.
So I have been looking into, what is today's version of coachability? And actually what I realised is that there are two separate pieces. There is what I call coaching readiness, and then there is coachability. And the coaching readiness is the upfront piece about, is this person ready for coaching? Is coaching actually the best intervention for what it is that they want to achieve? Are they willing? Are they able to make the most of it? Do they even understand what coaching is and what it is not? Are they primed to make the most of it because they understand that this is about them doing their own thinking, not about the coach doing the thinking for them? There are also some things around that are more systemic. So is the organisation ready for this? That is assuming that this is organisational coaching, which of course it isn't always. Sometimes it's privately funded. But if it's funded by the organisation, is the organisation primed and ready? Has the organisation, and there is a representative for the organisation, and I call them, based on a term that Karen Dean and Sam Humphrey came up with, I call them the coaching custodian. This coaching custodian represents the organisation. And as coaches, we can do a better job if that coaching custodian has done a really great job in the first place at identifying why the organisation wants to use coaching in the first place. How does it tie to their strategy, so that the coaching custodian can prime the individual that they believe is ripe for coaching. I'm not sure if that's the right word, ripe for.
Ready.
Yeah, ready. Yes, exactly. But also for that coaching custodian to be able to brief the coach coach such that the coach has the context of the organisation's strategy and how this coaching fits into that strategy, and whether actually this coach is the best fit coach for this particular person and this particular area, domain that they want coaching in. So there's all sorts of things wrapped up in this thing I call coaching readiness, which is before coachability comes into play. Coachability is much more about, once the coaching starts, how do we as the coach draw out that coachability? And that's about how this person we're working with thinks, how we can enable them to think in a style that suits them. And when I talk about thinking, I don't just mean the cerebral, I do mean the full body thinking and sensing. So that's what I mean by the coachability part. But these two pieces are separate. We have to get better at coaching readiness. I feel as though we've lost that over the last at least decade, if not longer, in that organisations are trying to be as efficient as possible. And so they've cut corners with setting up coaching for success in their organisations.
I agree with you. I think we've lost it, all the focus has gone. And I wonder whether that premise that is quite frequently out there, that anybody can benefit from coaching. Coaching is for everybody, and it can kind of suit anything. And if we're good enough coaches, we can make it work. Yep, good. I'm glad you're pulling your... Claire's got her head in her hands as I say that.
Yes. Good enough coaches. Oh, my word. This is how coaches get themselves into a pickle, thinking, I should, in inverted commas, be able to turn this person around. But, you know, if coaching was not the right intervention in the first place, they need something else, like training, for example, or therapy, or feedback from their boss, or mentoring. There are so many other options that might be a better fit for whatever it is that the individual is looking to achieve. So, of course, the coach can't turn that person around, in inverted commas, if this thing called coaching is not what they needed or wanted in the first place. If they're not motivated to do the thinking for themselves, if actually they're coming expecting mentoring. And we all know that no matter how well people are primed for what coaching is and is not, they will try and hook us into that mentoring thing, because that's how our educational processes have set things up. And that's how our organisations have set things up, to be told what to do.
And there's safety in being told what to do, so it's comfortable.
Yes, exactly. It is. And there is somebody else to blame if it all goes wrong. Well, I did what you told me to do. Well, this isn't what this lovely thing called coaching is all about, which is about them blossoming and being able to find their own voice and articulate who is it that they want to be as a leader, as a team member, as a community member, as a parent, as a spouse or partner, etc., etc. That's what this lovely thing called coaching is about. And I can't tell somebody how to be that leader that they want to be. For example, the way I lead is going to be very different to the way somebody else leads. But I digress there. That's getting us more into the topic of what is coaching and what is not coaching. But that is all part and parcel of helping a person understand whether this is the thing they want to sign up for. So even if the organisation has done the screening to figure out that coaching is the optimal intervention, the individual also needs to understand what it is they're signing up for, and are they motivated to do the hard work of thinking for themselves, because it isn't an easy option. It's not sprinkling pixie dust over them. Oh, don't we wish it was, but it really isn't. And so this is why I am waving the banner, banging the drum about coaching readiness, and particularly about coaching custodians, taking back some of this
priming almost, isn't it? Priming responsibility.
Yes, priming. Yes, because it's like any other strategic intervention, learning and development intervention that they are spending a lot of money on, or even a little money on. It is the organisation's money for which they want a return on investment or return on expectations. And if they're using coaching for the wrong reasons, the wrong people at the wrong time, they're not going to get that return on investment or return on expectations. So coaching custodians, whoever those are, whether that's a head of coaching, I think there are fewer and fewer people heading up coaching in organisations these days as headcount reductions, etc. It's become more of a part of either an HR leads role or an L&D leads role or an OD leads role, or it shrinks and shrinks and shrinks until it's part of a much bigger remit. And of course, that makes it really difficult for the person who's in that role to have enough capacity. So we have to feel for people in that role.
And also, they may not know that much about coaching themselves.
Right. And one of the things I've been contemplating, along with Sam Humphrey, who collaborated with me on cultivating coachability, even if they have trained themselves as coaches, that's not training on the coaching custodian role. And that's quite different. Being part of a system, looking at this from a systemic, strategic point of view, as you would hope that they would do with every other intervention that they put in place. But this needs as much of that strategy head as anything else that they're investing money on behalf of the organisation. That cannot be handed over to the coaches to do that work for them, because the coaches are not part of that system. They don't necessarily understand the strategy of the organisation. So it's as though we've been given that remit and we can't possibly do the job of the coaching custodian because we're not in the system.
And even if we are in the system, if there's internal coaches with a coaching custodian, which I guess that still happens quite frequently.
Yes.
That's another layer of complexity, actually. And the coaching custodian actually possibly has to do even more.
Yes, because, of course, we've then got ethics involved. We've got, how is this internal coach looking at the picture across the piece? How are they drawing in all the different stakeholders?
The confidentiality often gets quite complex, and the contracting around outcomes and that kind of stuff.
Absolutely. Yes, exactly. And if internal coaches or external coaches, if we are acting in isolation, we're not seeing that bigger picture for the organisation. What we're getting is, in those one-to-ones, we're hearing a side of the story in inverted commas. And yes, we work with the individual who we've got there, but what is the context within which we're doing this coaching? That's also part and parcel of coaching readiness, is us as the coach understanding the context as well as the individual understanding the context. And sometimes that context is not transparent to the individual, let alone to the coach.
There's a real complexity for sure there around coaches going, well, I don't need to understand the context. I don't need to understand the story. It doesn't matter if I come from that. Again, we can coach anybody. And actually, that's a little bit challenged by what you're saying there, Claire, I think.
Yes. I'm not saying we need to be able to do the person's job. We don't need to understand that industry inside out, back to front and upside down. But if we are working on behalf of the organisation, because they are the ones paying us, then we do need to understand what is their strategic intent for this coaching. And not so that we can drive the direction of the coaching, but so that we can sometimes play devil's advocate for the individual, because they are part of this system, and the ripple effect of whatever they decide to do will have an impact on that organisation and the people in that organisation and the profits of that organisation, etc., etc. So we don't need to know everything about everything. We do not need to understand their role or how to do it or have ever done it in the past. We don't need to understand their industry, but we need enough context of the intent and the purpose of this coaching in the context of what the organisation is trying to achieve.
Intent and purpose really sings out to me, because I was thinking about, so how is this different when it's not organisationally funded? And yes, but the intent and purpose aspect of it is still really important, I think, in coaching readiness, isn't it?
Yes. So if we are contracting with an individual, we'll want to know what is their intent and purpose for this coaching, big picture wise, and what is the context within which they are making decisions. So I do think we have a duty of care not only to the individual, but also to the individual stakeholders, their partner, if they have a partner, their children. If this person is constantly looking to figure out, or is dropping into the conversation about how many hours they're working, for example, and never managing to get home at night, I do think we have a duty of care to their wider familial and community system of what is the impact that these choices are having on other parts of their life. And this isn't for us to make those decisions for them. It's for us to simply play devil's advocate so that they can make those decisions in full awareness, not in the awareness, the consciousness that their organisational system is setting up for them. Because let's face it, these days, organisations have high expectations of the people who work for them. High. And the organisation is very rarely going to be the one who says, it's time you went home now. You have a family to tend to have relationships with. This is not the be all and end all of life. So if the organisation is not going to do that, the individual will have that message deeply ingrained in them. This is the capitalist way.
And it's rewarded.
Yes, exactly. And yes, there will be times when they are the breadwinner, as we call them, the person providing financially for their family, then that is going to be a driver. And there are long-term implications for always being on behalf of the organisation. So there's something in there. I don't quite know how we got onto that.
Well, it's about when we're working with individuals and intent and purpose and seeing the broader picture, and there's still a systemic view. And it made me think about one of the ways when I first meet people, I describe my coaching as I say it's a space to get above. So because what we see is what's immediately in front of us, whether that's a barrier or a path, and we want to see where you're going and see that there's 2, 4, 6, 8 ways. And that metaphor feels like what you're talking about, that as a coach, we have not to make choices about which path they take, but to help them get above where they are and look at the bigger picture.
Yes, absolutely.
And so you've talked a lot about coaching readiness, and we've talked less about coachability. Are you seeing that coaching readiness are the skills and the competencies almost that people aren't applying as much, or do you feel there's something in both?
There is something in both. So coaching readiness requires a lot more of the coaching custodian before the coach even gets involved. So once the coach gets involved, then we move into what I call a compatibility call rather than a chemistry call. The chemistry call tries to cover everything but the kitchen sink because the coaching readiness has not been screened for properly. So we're trying to do everything and we can't do any of it well. Sam Humphrey and I, in some recent research, found that coaches were trying to cover something like 18 different things in a chemistry call, and most chemistry calls 30 minutes to 45 minutes. And so none of them could be done at depth or well. So we're skimming the surface. So this is why we're saying that we need much of that to be done before the coach even gets involved. And then we move to a compatibility call, which is screening for only 4 things. That's all we do in a compatibility call to make sure we are compatible and there are no conflicts of interest.
I'm sure you're going to tell us, Claire, but tell us what the 4 are.
So we will be double checking that the person is ready for coaching, but this will not be the first time that they will have been asked these questions about coaching readiness. We will be also making sure that they are ready for what it entails. But more than this, we'll be checking that the two of us can work well, that my style of support is going to be commensurate with their learning style, for example, and that my style of challenge is going to get them just out of their comfort zone, not so much that it would stress them out, but also not so little that they remain in their cozy corner. So we're checking out the coach's style of support and challenge and whether that matches up to what the individual needs and wants. And then the last thing we're doing is checking for conflicts of interest. So anything that didn't already come up in the coaching readiness screening that the coaching custodian might just not know enough about the coach to know that there might be a conflict of interest. So, for example, am I already coaching a friend of this person or some other person who is in their network, and we might decide together, actually, that's a bit of a close call. That doesn't allow for the individual to feel like everything will be confidential. No matter how much I promise confidentiality, they've got to have the last say about whether they feel that there is any doubt in their minds about that. And then at the end of that compatibility call, we're both deciding whether we want to move forward with the coaching. So that's the 4 things in the compatibility call. And once we've both decided, and if we decide not to, I mean, there's lots of stuff in there that we could take to supervision about what if, how do I say to the person I'm having a compatibility call that I don't think we're a good match to work with. You know, the first time a coach does that, or the second time, third time, it can feel a bit awkward. So figuring out how to have those conversations might come to supervision. So we've got the skills of coaching readiness there. A lot of that is a skill for the coaching custodian to learn. Then we've got the compatibility piece for us. And then we've got this drawing out of coachability. So assuming we've decided we are going to work together, what is it that the coach does and says that draws out the coachability in the other person? And that's where my previous book, The Transformational Coach, comes in, because there's a lot of good stuff in there about drawing that out of them rather than pouring in.
You mentioned supervision, and that was going to be my next question around how does this come into supervision, or what aspects do you think are most important for supervisors in particular to be aware of?
You know how in supervision, as supervisors, often the question we ask is, what does the contract say? Can we go back to the contract and see what you've contracted to do together? So I would argue that another question that needs to come up over and over and over again in supervision is, how coaching ready was this person in the first place? And what can we as the coach learn about coaching readiness, and how to go back to the coaching custodian and influence something different around that screening process? So that would be a question I would like supervisors to be asking alongside the what does the contract say? How coaching ready was this individual when you first started working with them? There's a ton of stuff to unpack there. It's about whether the individual knew what coaching was or was not. It's whether the organisation had briefed the coach. It's whether coaching was the right intervention for whatever it is that the individual and the organisation wanted to achieve. So there's a ton of stuff wrapped up in that question about how coaching ready was this individual.
Including, for a lot of coaches, which I think, in my experience, what makes them in a way scared to go back to coaching custodians or to ask these questions, is the financial worry of, as you said earlier, I might have to say no. And that's a bit of an ethical dilemma that actually needs surfacing within supervision.
Yes, definitely, because we've got this tricky balancing act, haven't we, between we all need to earn money, assuming, well, internal coaches need to earn money too, but they've got a salary.
Yes. But they might not continue to have a salary if they don't continue to have coachees. So there's still that pressure and that pressure to demonstrate.
Yeah, depending on where their coaching is the whole of their job or a smaller part of their job, they may still have a job, not be able to do the coaching. But for external coaches who need to bring in money to cover their living costs at the very least, that can get in the way of making ethical decisions about coaching readiness. Is coaching fit for this person? Am I a good fit for this person? Is the time right for this person? Is the time right for the organisation, etc., etc.? So, yeah, money, that evil of money. I don't mean to make it out as evil. We all do need money, but it can colour the decisions we make. The other thing that colours those decisions is our drive to get hours of coaching under our belt in order to get a credential. We want to get as many hours as we can so we can get to the next level of credential. But that means that we could put hours in front of coaching readiness questions. And the problem with that is that if you take on people to coach who are not coaching ready, you will start to doubt yourself because it will be really hard coaching. And as coaches, we often blame ourselves. If only I could find the perfect question to ask this person, I might be able to make headway. If only I could, if only I knew how to. And so coaches will often bring that kind of self-doubt into the supervision room. And it's not about them. It's about the individual. Well, it could be about the partnership, the relationship, for sure. But too often we allow those drivers of hours and finances to drive us, and then that damages our self-esteem because we end up working with people who are not coaching ready.
And the other area, certainly speaking from my own practice, occasionally where people are provided with coaching as part of particularly leadership programs. And so they want the qualification or the certification of I've completed, or they're told they need to complete a leadership program. And coaching's part of that. And it's a requirement as part of that. Again, the coaching readiness gets quite complex in those places.
It really does, yes, because the person there has signed up for the leadership development program, as you've said. They want to be a better leader, but they don't really know what this thing tacked on to it is, this coaching thing. What is that all about? And because in the leadership development program, it's probably a bit more on the content, being given content, being given models, having experts in the room, helping them as a cohort to understand how to delegate, how to motivate, how to communicate, etc., etc. They're in that mindset of receiving information, sucking it all in. Great, really great stuff. But when they then come into the coaching room, they're expecting more of the same. They're expecting the coach to be more of the teacher and trainer and mentor, just like the facilitator is. And that's a very different role. So organisations often don't set up that separate piece of coaching very well. So the individuals don't really know what to expect or how to make the most of it, how to show up themselves. And coaches find themselves in a bind there as well, because they may end up working with somebody who's like, oh, I didn't really sign up for this coaching malarkey. I wanted to know how to delegate, and I've got that. I don't now want to figure out what's my style of delegation. So yes, it becomes really tricky if we have that combination. It's a great combination if it's briefed well, but so infrequently is it briefed well.
And so our audience is mostly going to be coaches and coach supervisors, I'm guessing, maybe some coaching custodians. Yeah. Let's hope, because it would be great if they were listening. But from a coach and a coach supervisor perspective, again, I'm going to put you on the spot, Claire, so feel free to tell me, no, I read the book, but kind of top tips or a couple of key questions or things to consider that you think actually we need to bring back into our coaching awareness and our coaching toolkit.
So it is different depending on who I'm speaking to. So if I'm speaking to a coaching custodian, it would be around the rigor that they bring to the setup of coaching for success, knowing what the end in mind is, not just for this one coaching conduct, but for coaching as a whole, as an intervention, because coaching is not the end in mind. What is the end in mind for the organisation? That's what we need to understand. So my top tips for coaching custodians would be very different to my top tips for coaches. For coaches, it would be to have really good quality conversations with those coaching custodians with whom we work and help those coaching custodians to think through these more strategic questions, and such that the coaching that we then do is set up for better success. So that is also a different skill set for coaches, to have that kind of conversation with a coaching custodian, because that's kind of it's a business development thing, really.
And it's making me think actually quite a few coaches in this day and age may not have that connection. So if they're on a coaching platform or an associate, there's another level removed there, isn't there?
Yes. And of course, that's where we could have that conversation with the coaching platform or with the associateship about how they set up coaching for success, because they are a middleman coaching custodian, if you like, middle person. So yes, the coach could have those conversations with them as well. But that is all about relationship building, and how can we as coaches bring something different, added value to the coaching custodian in the way that coaching is delivered for their organisation, such that the return on that investment is higher. And we've heard stories about coaches who have had that conversation with a coaching custodian and then found that actually they got more work as a result, because the coaching custodian was so relieved to have a coach who would help them to figure out how to do this more systemically and strategically. So it's worth doing. So that's for the coach in terms of the coaching readiness skills. And then there's the coachability skills, which those are all in the transformational coach. Well, they're not all in the transformational coach.
But it's a very good place to start.
Yes, there's 83 mindset shifts in the transformational coach that help coaches to let go of some of this old baggage that has served us well in other roles in our lives, but do not serve the clients that we work with so well in a coaching capacity. So we need to unlearn a ton of stuff to be the best coach we can be. We can talk about all of this in a 40-minute podcast, but there is a ton more in cultivating coachability and in the transformational coach.
What you say throughout the book, almost at the end of every single chapter, Claire, was take it to supervision. If you're unsure,
Yes. And because we need a place to unpack this, it's complicated. It's not something that we can figure out alone, particularly because we probably, almost certainly, didn't get any training on coaching readiness and coachability. Well, we would have done on coachability, although we might not have named it that. But coaching readiness, we won't have had any training on that. So this is definitely a gap that we need a place to go and talk about that. And it can be good to do that in one-to-one supervision, and it can be great to do it in groups where we can pool our resources and look at things through different angles and different perspectives.
Because like pretty much everything in coaching, it's not a cookie cutter. It's not one size fits all. So how you might have a conversation with one coaching custodian is going to be very different from another, because the context is different. And as you say, it's all about, and the systems are different.
Yes, there's not a one size fits all answer to this. So, you talk about top tips.
Yeah, I know.
It's really hard to come up with top tips when actually is so dependent. The answer is always, it depends on the person, on the coach, on the stakeholders around them, on the context, on the personalities, etc., etc.
Lots there. As you said, we could have kept talking, Claire, so much more. But any sort of, I'll steal a question that I've stolen from you many times, which is, what final words of wisdom would you give to our, rather than to yourself, kind of, what final words of wisdom would you like to share, Claire?
Yeah, I would say pay more attention to cultivating coachability. The thing that I write in the front of the book, when you do signings and things, I write, claim your agency. So figure out what is your agency around coaching readiness. And that doesn't mean you doing all of that screening yourself. It means enabling others to be able to do that coach screening as well.
I love that. We so often talk about supporting others in their agency and actually claiming it for ourselves as coaches and coach supervisors.
Yes.
I love that shift. So thank you so much for sharing your wisdom.
You are welcome.
If people want more of your wisdom, how can they connect with you, Claire, or work with you?
Well, they can definitely connect with me on LinkedIn. I am always happy to hear from fellow coaches. Clare Norman MCC, Claire without an I. They can sign up to Supervision with me if they wish to. I have plenty of group supervisions running throughout the year and one-to-one. And they can find out all about that on my website, which is clarenormancoachingassociates.com. They could come for mentor coaching if they are looking to get ready for ICF credentialing, or just because they want to sharpen their saw and resharpen their coaching edge, regardless of whether they're doing that for a credential or simply because they know that they've kind of lost that edge. And all of that is on my website as well. And I am also running a retreat in October, which you know about, Mastery with Soul.
With another fellow
podcastee.
Yes. Tell us about that.
So it's called Mastery with Soul, and this is about personal development and professional development, bringing those two things together. It's about giving ourselves some love, as well as raising our collective consciousness as coaches, as well as so it is sharpening our edge, as well as keeping us safe and sane in our work. So again, they can find that on my website under the mentor coaching tab. It's called Mastery with Soul. We've run it before. Well, as you know, as you have been there.
Yes, it was joyous and nourishing and lots of development as well. So yeah, can highly recommend. So thank you so much, Claire. What a joy.
Yes, it has been a joy. Thank you, Helen.
Thank you for listening to another podcast by the Association for Coaching. For over 20 years, our purpose has been to inspire and champion coaching excellence, advance the coaching profession, and make a sustainable difference to individuals, organisations and society. To find out more about the AC and our member benefits, follow us on LinkedIn or visit our webpage at associationforcoaching.com. Explore our digital learning hub and enjoy our extensive library of on-demand webinars, interviews, podcasts, and portfolio of live events featuring thought leadership, tools, models, and the latest industry trends to help you develop your coaching expertise.